Hi, I'm Michelle Grant, and welcome to the Grateful Podcast. This is a place where we explore what it means to lead sustainable change and hear stories from women around the globe who are working to build more just, generative, and even joyful futures for our food systems and our world. But on today's episode, it's just me. I like to offer these solo episodes as a chance to dive into a particular tool or a topic that I find coming up often in the leadership programs that I run or in conversations with one-on-one coaching clients, and just sharing my perspective and insights in the hope that it supports you on your leadership journey. And today's topic is meditation as a leadership practice. I've been wanting to do this episode for a while because meditation as a tool is something that I explore in a lot of the work that I do, and it's something that has been personally really transformative for me. So today I wanted to share what I've learned in my meditation journey over the years and hope that it helps you establish a practice and that practice potentially has some spillover effects into the work that you do, the relationships that you have, and the contribution that you make in the world. So I've structured this episode as follows. First, I wanted to share my story around meditation, how I have come to engage with it in the way that I do. I want to dig into what is meditation? What are we actually trying to do when we engage with this practice? Offer you some insights and a framework that I hope can support you in your practice. And wrap up with talking about why meditation, from my perspective, is a leadership practice. What is the literature saying? Why is it relevant for any of us trying to lead change? In the end, we'll explore some tips to help you start your own practice or perhaps even deepen your practice if you already have one. So let's start with my story with meditation. Perhaps like many of you, I dabbled in meditation for many years. I had quite a busy and intense job, and I found myself using meditation a little bit like medication. So if I was feeling stressed or overwhelmed, or I had a big presentation coming up, then I would tell myself, oh, I need to meditate, as if it was some sort of like prophylactic medication that would help me navigate these more difficult times. And I kind of knew as I was doing it that was not the most supportive way to engage with meditation, but found it hard to find the space to really change the way I was engaging with it. And that space finally came along about 7 years ago when I started doing my advanced yoga teacher training. The first part of that training was a week-long intensive with my teacher at her retreat center in Spain. And as is a part of all of these programs, as you're learning to teach yoga and meditation, we had every morning a lengthy 1 hour seated meditation practice together in community. And that is just always a wonderful opportunity to see what this practice can be if you really commit to it in a dedicated way. And so after that first week of training, I knew I had a year of trainings ahead of me, and I thought this is a great opportunity to really try and embed this practice in my life. So I made a commitment for the next year. I'm going to meditate every single day. And while the aim was to do 20 minutes a day, I just told myself the commitment was at least 2 minutes a day so that it stayed manageable and doable. And I started that practice. I was able to engage with it, but the way I was engaging with my practice was not always very comfortable. And this kind of came to a head when I did an intensive silent retreat with a lot of meditation woven into it. And I realized that I had a lot of frustration with myself because I didn't think I was doing what I should be doing when I was meditating. And in the course of that silent retreat where you have no other distractions, so you just get to sit with all these wonderful thoughts, I realized that I had a misperception of actually what meditation is. And if I went back to the original teachings, I could actually work with myself in a different way. And I'll talk more about this in a moment so this doesn't sound so abstract. What I came to learn by engaging with this practice so regularly is once the year was up and I gave myself a little bit more flexibility to negotiate again, because in that year I had said no negotiation with yourself. Every day you just do this. It's non-negotiable. So when the space for negotiation crept back in again, as it always does, I then, of course, skipped a day here and there. And what was really striking is how different I felt on those days when I hadn't done my morning meditation. I noticed a profound difference in the way I related to my thoughts, in the feelings of anxiety or doubt or worry, and how much more pronounced these feelings were on days when I hadn't done my practice. And through that experience, I just realized this is not something I want to negotiate. This is something I want embedded. And I think that it's fundamental for me as a human being and for me as an aspiring leader to engage with this on a daily basis. I fully understand that might not be the case for you, but it's why I feel so passionate about sharing this tool, sharing approaches that can help you engage with it in a more graceful and easeful way, and to also keep talking about why this is potentially a really powerful leadership practice. So that's enough about me. I want to turn to you now and help you start to see what your own relationship is to meditation. And to do that, I'm just going to give you a minute now. I'm going to be completely quiet to let yourself get comfortable, get settled, either seated or standing, closing the eyes, and just take this next minute to do whatever you understand meditation to be, to practice whatever you think meditation is. I'll let you know when the minute's up, so relax into it. You can slowly start to wiggle the fingers and the toes. Take a nice deep breath, bringing your awareness into the body. And then when you're ready, just opening the eyes again. Now I'm interested to know what your questions are. When you have this chance to meditate, what questions or doubts arise for you? Now, unfortunately, we can't have a chat directly as this is a podcast, but what I do know from doing this with hundreds of people is that some very common questions arise. Most often, the questions people have are, am I doing this right? What am I meant to be doing here? Secondly, I can't stop my thoughts. How do I stop my thoughts? And then finally, isn't this supposed to feel peaceful? It doesn't really feel that way for me. And from my experience, a lot of these questions are coming from a lack of information about what it is that we're actually doing when we're practicing meditation. So let's start with that. What is meditation? My favorite definition of meditation is the following. Meditation is whatever happens when you sit with the intention to meditate. I love this definition because it speaks to the fact that meditation is a practice. It's not a state. So I'm going to say that again. Meditation is a practice. It's not a state. And that was one of my big misconceptions of meditation when I started. I had the impression that I should be sitting in this blissful, transformed state where I felt completely calm and elevated. And when that wasn't happening, I felt like I was doing something wrong. But when we actually understand that meditation's not that state, it's a practice, and it's whatever arises when you sit with the intention to meditate, that completely changes our expectations of what happens. Now, meditation is an ancient practice. It has its roots in a variety of different wisdom traditions, and those wisdom traditions are connected to spiritual philosophies of what life is. And I think it's actually really helpful to have some insight into what the philosophical grounding of this practice is, because it can also change our understanding of what it is and what we're doing when we're engaging with it. So there are, of course, a lot of different schools of philosophical thought, a lot of different lineages that meditation come through. But if you look at what's similar in many of them, it's really a connection to this central idea that who we perceive ourselves to be, this separate, individual, disconnected self, is not really who we are in our essence. This ego, this personality that we have created to help us navigate the world, somehow keeps us disconnected from what our true or more essential self is, which is a more expansive and connected concept. And sometimes I like to think of this as two concentric circles. There's a circle in the center, which is this limited, smaller understanding of ourselves, our identification with our personality, with our story, with all these things that we think we are. And that has this really strong and solid wall around it that keeps us disconnected from the bigger circle or sphere around it, which is actually our true or essential self, a more expansive and connected understanding of what it means to be human. Now, this larger, more expansive self, it has a lot of different names depending on the tradition that we're coming from. For some people, that is about nature. For some people, it's the great mystery, a nod to the fact that we don't really understand what this is. It is called by some people a greater wisdom. Others refer to it as universal consciousness or presence or awareness. Buddhism talks a lot about emptiness, and in other traditions, this might be what is referred to as God. So regardless of the term that you're looking at here, all it's inviting us to understand is that if we're able to soften, relax, and dissolve this very solid shell that we build around ourselves that separates us from something bigger than ourselves, then that allows us to have this more interconnected understanding of what it actually means to be a human being. It helps us have a lived experience, a felt experience of being connected to something bigger, whatever that something bigger is for you. And I feel that this is so critical for us all right now. We're in this planetary polycrisis, and many are talking about how the deeper underlying cause of all these crises that we're facing is a crisis of disconnection, that we've lost connection to ourselves, to others, and to what it really means to live in harmony and as a part of this planet, which is our home. And I know as I'm saying this, I feel uncomfortable because I don't want those of you who might dismiss this as woo-woo to tune out now. I understand how it can come across that way, but I also think what's very interesting is modern science is actually showing us that this capacity for spirituality is actually innate. We have an inbuilt capacity for spirituality, and that simply means that it's possible for all of us humans to have this sense of a relationship to something bigger than ourselves. And many of us have experienced that, and then we don't necessarily need the science because we have a lived experience of it. But it's very interesting when we see the studies happening now that actually show this innate neurological capacity for us humans for spirituality. And if What I just described is a little hard to grasp. I would like to share some distinctions that a researcher by the name of Dr. Lisa Miller makes. She wrote a book called The Awakened Brain, which offers a really nice summary of some of the science and psychology around spirituality. But she makes this distinction that as human beings, we can sit in two types of awareness. The first is what we tend to be most familiar with, and that's what she calls achieving awareness. Achieving awareness is that state where the perception that we have is that our purpose is to organize and control our lives. We individually are responsible for that, and we are centering ourselves around this question of how can I get and keep what I want? Now, of course, this helps us to reach our goals and move things forward, but the problem is when we're only in this state, it really keeps us in that perspective of being disconnected and separate and individual, which obviously, if that's all we have, can have a lot of implications for our own mental health, for our own well-being. And what Dr. Miller talks about is the need for us to balance this achieving awareness with what she calls awakened awareness. And awakened awareness is when we're in a state where we have a connection to a larger consciousness, a larger awareness, and also to the meaning that this reveals to us. So it's an experience that you may or may not have already had, where this sense of this individual separate identity dissolves into something larger and beyond us. For some people, that's an experience they have when they're in nature. For others, it's an experience they have in prayer. For others, it's an experience they have in community with others. There are a lot of places where we can access this, but this awakened awareness is really being connected to a larger awareness, a larger presence, and a larger consciousness that connects all of us. And when we're in this awakened awareness, our central question is, what is life showing me now? So it's a more receptive way of being than when we are in achieving awareness. And this awakened awareness invites us to step away from being this individual maker of our own life and rather to see ourselves as seekers of our own path, of looking at what life is showing us. And so this distinction, whether you call it separate self and the connected self, or the ego and the essential self, or achieving awareness and awakened awareness, all of these things are pointing to this duality that we navigate as humans of feeling both separate and connected. And so in our meditation practice, it's a practice that's inviting us into this space of connectedness, where we feel connected to something bigger than our small individual selves. And in that sense, meditation helps us to reconnect to our true nature and to be able to sit in that seat of awareness, to sit as the observer of the noise in our head, the observer of the sensations in the body, the observer of what is happening around us. And the difficult thing for us humans who have been raised to spend most of our time in achieving awareness is that more than anything, connecting to this awakened awareness is about letting go. It's about softening and loosening these layers of armor and noise and protection and thoughts that we identify with, but that aren't really us in our more essential form. And so when we see meditation as an opportunity to step into this place of the observer, that can help us understand, okay, so perhaps meditation isn't about stopping the thoughts. And that's that first question most people have. I can't stop the thoughts. Am I doing this wrong? So meditation is not about stopping the thoughts. As human beings, that's pretty much impossible. There was quite a well-known study in 2010 that was done at Harvard that found from the over 2,000 adults in their study, around 50% of the time, their thoughts were wandering. And around 90% of the thoughts during the day are repetitive. And so it's unrealistic for us as humans to stop that in any way. But what we can do, and what meditation is inviting us into, is not to stop the thoughts, but to change our relationship to the thoughts. And when you look at the first line of the Yoga Sutras, which is a foundational text, particularly for modern day yoga, the first line is Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha, which in one of the translations means yoga is the non-identification with the fluctuations of the mind. Now, I know when I say yoga, you might immediately be thinking about people standing in stretchy poses, but actually, meditation is one of the limbs of the yoga practice, and one that in particular supports this non-identification with the fluctuations of the mind. So it's not saying we're stopping the fluctuations of the mind. We're simply saying we're no longer identifying with them and believing them to be us, as we tend to do in the rest of our time. And to make that really concrete, you could close your eyes for a moment now and just start to repeat over and over inside your mind the word hello, or any word or any greeting in your language. It really doesn't matter what you're saying, but just start to repeat it over and over in your mind. And as you do that, you might start to notice that there is the one that's saying the words, and there's the one that's observing the words. And in meditation, we're inviting ourselves into this seat of the observer. And as we relax into this seat of the observer, we're not trying to transcend or deny that little separate self, that version of us that is identifying with or caught up in the thoughts. That will probably always be there. We're just becoming aware and letting go and relaxing back into this seat of the observer. And in that process, what we often start to see is that a lot of the suffering in our lives, not pain, but suffering, is the mental, the emotional, and the physical disturbances or stories that we add to the events or to the things that are taking place, that we put on top of the observations and the objective things that are going on. And this practice of meditation helps us to get some more space around that and to have this experience of being in the seat of the observer. And in that practice of observing, we also see that everything in our experience and in life is arising and falling away again. So nothing is permanent. Change is actually the only guarantee in this lifetime. And it just gives us a different way of working with that, a way that's more gentle and kind. We're just trying to have a bigger perspective on our thoughts and our feelings and a different relationship to them. And so that leads me to the goal of meditation. Often we have this belief that meditation is to help us de-stress or relax, or it's to help us have a blissful experience. But those are potential side effects of the practice, but they're not the goal. The goal is doing the practice. And whatever happens when you sit to do the practice is meditation. So while we might be inviting something in, while there might be possibilities that come out of it, when we make that the goal, we start to have a difficult relationship with the practice. And so just like you might have heard to focus on the journey rather than the destination, it's a similar concept with meditation. The focus, or what we want to commit to, is the practice itself, not some idea of what should happen during the practice or some idea of what should come out of it. And this is a reading from Bob Sharples, which I think explains that really nicely. He says, "Don't meditate to fix yourself, to heal yourself, to improve yourself, to redeem yourself. Rather, do it as an act of love, of deep, warm friendship to yourself. In this way, there is no longer any need for the subtle aggression of self-improvement, for the endless guilt of not doing enough. It offers the possibility of an end to the ceaseless round of trying so hard that wraps so many people's lives in a knot. Instead, there is now meditation as an act of love. How endlessly delightful and encouraging." And so I think that beautifully sums up the attitude that we can bring to our practice. And Again, the idea that meditation is a practice and not a state. So let's move now to what do we actually do when we practice meditation? Now, the first thing to say is there are so many different types of meditation, and none of them are better or worse than others. It's very much about finding what resonates with you, what works for you in your context. But what we do see generally is a series of stages in the practice. Typically, there's an invitation to relax, to come into the present moment, to get yourself comfortable and settled. That's typically followed by a period of concentration where we use some sort of a focal point. That might be the breath, it might be a mantra, it might be a visualization, any range of things that we can use as a focal point for our concentration. And after a certain amount of time with that focal point, we might then be invited to open our awareness and to simply sit as an observer of what is happening inside and around us. Now, what tends to happen though, particularly if people are trying to guide themselves through a practice, is they might settle down, they might start to focus on whatever they've chosen as a focal point. Let's just use the breath as an example here. And within maybe 1 second or 1 minute of starting to focus, the mind starts to wander. It goes in all kinds of different directions. Your awareness gets pulled with it, or you have sensations in the body or feelings coming up and your awareness gets pulled there. And that goes on for a while, maybe a few seconds, maybe a few minutes, maybe an hour. But at one point, you will have a moment of awareness. And that moment of awareness is when you go, oh, I haven't been focusing on that focal point for a long time. And when we get to that moment of awareness, typically what happens is we judge ourselves. We say, oh, I'm such a terrible meditator. Oh, there I go again, lost in my thoughts. I can't stop my thoughts. We have this negative judgment. We pull ourselves quite aggressively back to whatever focal point we have. And then 2 seconds later, the whole cycle starts again. We get pulled off somewhere. We have that moment of awareness. We judge ourselves as not meditating well and pull ourselves back to the focal point. Now you do that for a few rounds, and before too long, you don't feel great. You might end the practice saying, oh, that was busy. I got pulled everywhere. Oh, I can't meditate. This doesn't feel good. I'm not good at this. And after you've had a few rounds of that, normally you drop the practice because it doesn't feel like it's bringing you much. You don't think you're achieving the objective. You think you're not good at it. You're judging yourself. And understandably, it's just easier then to walk away from it. What I would invite you to do or to play with instead is to just have a different relationship to that process. So again, let's say we've chosen the breath as a focal point. We sit down, we settle, we get comfortable, we start to focus on the breath. 1 second later, our awareness is pulled by our thoughts or the sensation in the body or an emotion, whatever's coming up. And at one point, we become aware of that. Rather than jumping to judgment here, what we can recognize is that moment of awareness is actually the golden moment in meditation, so to speak, because it is that moment where you've sat in the seat of the observer. You've come back into that awakened awareness that is broader and more connected to everything that is, and you've been able to observe yourself more objectively. So actually, that's something to celebrate. And at that point, then we have a choice. Rather than judging ourselves negatively, we can smile and acknowledge that that's that golden moment of awareness. We can even relax there for a moment, sitting in that seat of the observer. Or we can very gently, with that smile, with that acknowledgement that this is exactly the practice, just really gently draw ourselves back to the breath. And to see that breath or whatever focal point you're using rather than an anchor, as a perch, just like a bird you fly away from and then you come back to and land on it. And to land on it with that friendly energy, that acceptance that this is totally a part of the practice. And once you've spent some time resting on that perch in that place of focus, towards the end of the practice, you might want to release that and just gently sit in that awakened awareness, that seat of the observer, that place of a greater consciousness, observing whatever's coming up inside of you and whatever's happening around you. And when we come to the practice with this more gentle way of working with ourselves, with an understanding it's totally normal that we got pulled away again, it just creates this more friendly, loving attitude that Bob Sharples was mentioning in the little reading that I shared with you before. So those are some thoughts and insights that I have collected along my meditation journey that I hope help you have a different relationship to the practice, that I hope invite you to engage with it with a different energy, with a different way of working with yourself that's more gentle and loving and maybe encouraging as well. So at the end of this episode, I'm going to guide you through a short practice so that you can have an experience of being guided through that process that I just described. But before we jump into the practice, I would like to answer some commonly asked questions. When I decided to record this podcast, I put out a message in my community asking for any questions people had about meditation as a leadership practice. And I got some great responses in, and they're questions that I tend to hear quite a lot in different workshops or places where I've introduced this before. So I wanted to give some time to that before we end with doing a nice practice together. So the first question that came in is one that I wanted to address anyway, and that is, why do I think meditation is a leadership practice? So to answer that, I will share some of my own views and experiences, and I think it's important to do that by grounding it in how I understand leadership, because this is a big word that has a lot of different meanings and different interpretations depending on who you're talking to. So right now, how I understand or how I define leadership for myself is walking ourselves and others in the direction of greater personal and planetary well-being. And when we see leadership in this way, I talked about walking in a direction, so seeing leadership as a journey rather than a destination. And I also like that metaphor because I actually think how you're walking is as important as where you're going. So if we understand leadership in this way, I also then see leadership as a practice. It's not some perfect state or way of being that we are always in. It's rather a practice. And I think this is important because what I've noticed in my work is that the myth of this heroic leader is still very prevalent. This idea that there are certain people who possess the skills and the abilities, and it's just these select few who are able to take on leadership roles or lead themselves and others in a direction that we want to go. I really disagree with that. I actually think that leadership takes many forms and that we need all of these different forms to tackle the complex problems that we're facing. And so being able to access that latent leadership to really help people see themselves as a leader means giving people the space to understand what leadership means for them and how they want to uniquely embody it. It's about helping people understand what's the unique contributions that they can make. And I don't mean this in the sense of gifts that are bestowed on us that we can improve the world with, but rather skills, competencies, and qualities that we cultivate and that we cultivate through our practices and through our intention and through paying attention to what it is that we want to embody. So all of that is to say, what I'm about to share about my own experience with meditation as a leadership practice very much applies to me and how I contextualize and understand leadership from my own perspective and what I'm trying to cultivate and embody myself. And that might be completely different for you, and that's totally fine. So with that said, here are some of the qualities, competencies, and ways of being I think are important for my leadership that I have experienced meditation to support. So the first one of these, and I would probably say it's the strongest, is building leadership presence. So when I talk about leadership presence, I mean our ability to be present, not only mentally, but also physically and emotionally in the moment, and to be able to hold a centered and grounded space for ourselves and for others, regardless of what's going on. And I don't expect that as human beings we can always hold that space. We are always going to be pushed off center and pulled into reactive patterns that we've developed. So I really see the practice as a leader is being able to notice when that's happening and be able to guide ourselves back to that leadership presence, that centered and grounded place. And this is where I've seen a massive difference since I started my meditation practice. And this might be something that nobody else sees because it's very much an internal experience. But I used to be thrown off center more frequently, in the sense that if something happened, I would take it more personally. I would spend more time ruminating on it, losing energy thinking about it, and have trouble holding my own space while I was trying to deal with it. And a really simple and silly example of that just happened. So I just spent an hour recording this podcast and it switched to the wrong microphone. And so basically nothing was collected. Now, understandably, I felt frustrated. That's completely normal. I was able to acknowledge that frustration, take a little bit of space, recenter myself, and resolve to begin again, which is what we're doing right now. And a few years ago, I think when I wasn't practicing meditation like I am, that would have thrown me much more. I know objectively it's a silly and small thing, but the loss of time, that frustration would have pulled me off center for much longer. And so in meditation, we're constantly going through that practice of being pulled off our focal point and drawing ourselves gently back to it. And it's exactly the same with our leadership practice. We get pulled off center all the time, and we're just finding ways to gently bring ourselves back. Now, of course, that takes more than just a meditation practice, but that's definitely given me a mindset and experience of it that transfers then into times when I'm not in the practice of meditation. The second skill I think is really important for a leader to practice is deep listening. So really listening from a generative place rather than listening to respond or listening to extract knowledge or listening to judge others, really listening from that open and curious space. And meditation practice gives us a space to listen deeply to what's happening internally for us, but also to listen to what's happening around us in a non-judgmental, kind and curious way, which then spills over into other relationships and interactions. Another aspect of leadership that I think is important is connecting and relating to ourselves and others as human beings. So many of our systems and organizations and the ways that we've been socialized ask us to put up all of these different masks and to only take certain aspects of ourselves into certain places. And indeed, for some people, that's required also from a safety perspective. But I think if we were all much more honest about what it means to be a human being and have the realization that we're all having very similar experiences, that would give us a different way of relating to ourselves and others. And in the meditation practice, we're able to do that. We're allowing space for everything that is without blocking or judging or pushing away anything. And that helps us build this trust, a trust in ourselves to respond to whatever emerges, a trust in others to do the same, and a trust that there is actually something bigger than our own mind, wisdom that's greater than our own thoughts that's also at play here, and to try and cultivate a little bit more trust in that as well. And this also allows us to relax our own control a little bit, to stop trying to feel like we have to push and pull and control and organize everything in our lives, and rather allow some space for emergence, to see what comes out and to dance with that. I think an ability to be creative and innovative is really important for a leader. One of the definitions of mindfulness that I love is simply noticing new things, being present in the moment in a non-judgmental way and noticing new things. And so in having a practice of doing that I have experienced spills over into the rest of my life as well. An ability to be a little bit more resourceful, to notice new things or new connections or new opportunities. I feel that as a leader, it's really important to be able to focus and to be intentional about where we're putting our awareness. And in this day and age where we're literally pulled in all kinds of different directions with so much noise and so much information, having that ability of bringing ourselves back to a focal point is so important. And that's exactly what we're practicing in our meditation, is not a judging of ourselves for losing that focus, but just an ability to gently bring ourselves back to it. One of the last things that I've really noticed a difference in through my meditation practice is cultivating compassion for myself, for others, and also for the world around us. And I think compassion is just a fundamental ingredient to being able to collaborate with others in a more generative and graceful way, to have a greater understanding that we're all struggling as human beings, and an appreciation that even if somebody's doing something that we might not understand or might not like, to appreciate that it's making sense for them and that they're doing it to try and meet a need of their own. So having that lens of compassion for ourselves and others. The next question I got from the community was, what does research say about meditation as a leadership practice? This is a great question, and I want to answer it with a few disclaimers. So the first disclaimer is, whenever we're talking about the potential benefits of meditation, we have to be a little bit careful because it's very easy for us to confuse the benefits with the goal. The goal is the practice. Meditation is a practice, it's not a state. And yes, some of these benefits might come. That's all well and good and maybe nice, but it shouldn't become the goal for you. If it does, it can very quickly lead to frustration because there are many times we will practice and we won't feel connected to these benefits. And in that case, it's very easy for us to give up. But if we stay connected to this intention of meditation being a practice, that really encourages us to keep showing up regardless of the benefits or the side effects that might or might not be happening. The second disclaimer is that meditation and mindfulness are a little bit elusive to study. So there's actually no academic consensus on the definition of mindfulness or on the exact difference between mindfulness and meditation. And whether it's mindfulness or meditation, these practices are fully internally generated experiences. They're things that are happening inside of us, and that makes it really hard for us to study these things and also compare them, not only between individuals, but also between studies. So there's actually a really big body of research looking at mindfulness and meditation, but most of it is focused on its impact on our well-being. There's less that's linked it to leader development. And there was a nice paper that came out last year in 2022 in Human Resource Management Review, which offered a systematic review of the impact of mindfulness and meditation interventions on leader development. And it scanned around 2,000 relevant papers, and after a lot of exclusion criteria, focused on 30 key studies and the findings that could be synthesized from those studies around the impacts of mindfulness on leader development. And what the study found is that generally mindfulness interventions supported leader development in two main impact areas, what they called essential, and essential related to the well-being and the productivity of the leader. And the second impact area they looked at was transformative, and this looked at the relationships and the inner growth of the leader. So what these reviewed studies showed is that in this first impact area, personal well-being, mindfulness interventions helped improve stress management and how leaders were perceiving stress. The studies also showed a lot of other outcomes related to psychological well-being and health. So these were things like greater resilience, greater equanimity and ability to relax, an increased psychological flexibility and adaptability, greater self-esteem, reduced anxiety, and reduced mental fatigue. When it came to work productivity, the studies highlighted a positive impact in terms of information processing. So this is related to reducing multitasking, improving the ability to manage distractions and to not lose focus, and also an improved engagement and feeling of connections to the tasks and the situations that the leaders were encountering. When it came to this relationships impact area, the studies showed that these mindfulness interventions contribute to building and maintaining high-quality professional relationships. And that means an increased ability to consider others' opinions, to listen more attentively and openly to what others have to say, to have a greater social and contextual awareness, and to be able to respond in a more constructive way during challenging interactions with others. In this final impact area of inner growth, the studies highlighted that mindfulness, awareness, meditation practices tended to enhance leaders' awareness of their personal experience. So that's in terms of sensations in the body, feelings, and thoughts. And the participants reported a sense of connectedness, safety, appreciation, and gratitude. And generally, these interventions help to build a self-reflective capacity, self-awareness. And what this study showed, which I think is really important, is that a lot of the reviewed literature really emphasized the importance of a sustained and regular independent practice at home, outside of just, for instance, a short training workshop or some sort of program at the workplace. And that, again, speaks to this idea of meditation as a practice. And in this paper, there's a nice quote that I wanted to share, which says, "While mindfulness has an instrumental value of bringing a multitude of benefits to individuals and organizations, such as stress reduction and improved focusing, mindfulness is not one more cognitive behavioral technique to be deployed in a behavior change paradigm, but a way of being and a way of seeing that has profound implications for understanding the nature of our own minds and bodies and for living life as if it really mattered." And I really like that because it takes us again away from a focus on the benefits and a pushing of behavioral change, but back to this practice as really offering us a different way to connect with ourselves and the world around us. So the next question I got was, what is the difference between mindfulness and meditation? Great question. And as I mentioned earlier, there's no exact agreement on the difference between these terms. I can just share with you how I understand it. To my understanding, mindfulness is more secular. So it's not connected with any spiritual or philosophical perspective. It's about noticing new things and having a non-judgmental present moment awareness. And so a mindfulness practice might simply be turning the awareness to the breath. It might be noticing new sounds or sensations that are around you. It's any of these small practices we can do that help us have this present moment awareness and perhaps notice new things. Whereas meditation, as I discussed earlier, from my perspective, has this connection to something larger than ourselves, a spiritual or philosophical perspective that acknowledges how we perceive ourselves as individual and separate is not actually the full story. There is this greater wisdom, greater mystery, greater connectedness, whatever you want to call it. And the practice invites us to engage with that and potentially have a direct experience of it. Now, the reason why it gets a little bit confused is that mindfulness is actually inspired from Buddhism and from other spiritual practices. And actually, researchers are now starting to use the terms first and second generation mindfulness. And this first generation mindfulness are things like mindfulness-based stress reduction, anything that kind of conceptualizes mindfulness as a stress reduction and attention enhancement technique. Whereas second generation mindfulness interventions are mindfulness that includes conceptualizations of spirituality and the nature of self. So in this sense, I would connect mindfulness with this first generation mindfulness and meditation with what they're calling second generation mindfulness. And it's a little bit confusing because mindfulness actually grew out of the second generation mindfulness. Its roots are in these spiritual practices. So I kind of see it as a spectrum. I don't think a really clear differentiation is that important, except when it comes to how we are working with others and being aware of what we're inviting them into. So the next question I got is kind of related to that. It was, is one type of meditation better than another? Is mindfulness better than meditation? And my answer to both of those questions is no, there is no one practice that's better than the other. I think it really relates to what the need is and what it is you're looking to cultivate in terms of the practice. Are you looking to cultivate that non-judgmental present moment awareness, that being in the now? Are you looking to cultivate an experience of and a connection to something larger than yourself? And sometimes those things don't matter. You just want to feel more centered or more grounded or just generally better. So I really think the best type of meditation for you is one that you can regularly engage with, one that makes sense for you. And so when you're starting, you might want to try a wide range of different techniques and see which best align with you where you are right now, and also be open to the fact that that might change. What I practiced as meditation 10 years ago is different to what I practice now, and that's totally fine. So a sub-question I got here was, should I guide myself through meditation or should I use a guided meditation? And again, I think my answer is whichever works best for you and your context. And maybe it's a combination of the two. So some days I really feel like it's important for me to guide myself, to hold the space in a silent seated meditation. Other days I feel like I need the support of somebody else to guide me. And it's really just a feeling into what is it that I need right now that helps guide that decision for me. So I definitely don't think one option is better than the other, or that what I often hear from people is, well, I'm not really meditating unless I'm doing it myself. But I disagree with that. I think that having the support of someone guiding you, particularly when you're starting out, can be really, really helpful to establishing a regular practice. The next question was, when should I meditate? What's the best time to meditate? Why do they always say in the morning or the evening? My opinion on that is the best time to meditate is whatever time you will actually meditate. So if that's in the middle of the day or the middle of the night, I don't think that matters. It's just whatever works best with you in your context and that will enable you to keep showing up for the practice. So people often speak about meditating in the morning or the evening because practicing in those times acts like a bookend for your day. So if you think of those bookends that hold the books together on the bookshelf, it's kind of this space that you're cultivating at the beginning or the end of the day, or for some people, both, which helps you reconnect, recenter, and prepare for or digest what is happening. The next question I got was a great one. I find it really interesting on a couple of levels. So the question was, can meditation be addictive? Can it be that the more you do it, the more you want to do it? So maybe it was the use of the term addictive that made me sense there's a little bit of fear in this question. If I engage with this, am I going to get addicted to it? Will it start to control how I live my life? And I think it speaks to the experience a lot of us have when we're first encountering this concept that I introduced earlier of achieving awareness versus awakened awareness. Many of us have the perception that it's been through achieving awareness, that control and direction of everything in our lives in this separate and isolated approach, that's allowed us to be successful, whatever success means to us. And we have less of a connection with this awakened awareness, with this more receptive, responsive way of being in relation to the world around us. And so understandably, it can feel a little scary in the beginning to even open up a little bit of space where we relax that achieving awareness and try and connect to that awakened awareness. When we do it, however, I think it starts to open up an entirely new perspective of what it means to be a human and what we might find ourselves being called towards is a place where we have a greater balance between the two, between the achieving and the awakened state. So it's not been my experience that meditation becomes addictive, but it has been my experience that I want to commit to holding space for it because it does have a profound impact on my way of being and my way of seeing the world. I do know that early in my meditation journey, I had a little bit of a misconception of it. I had this connection between meditation and transcendence, this idea that I should reach a meditative state and that should be this blissful experience. And I did have some experiences of that in retreat settings, and it gave me that problem I've talked about many times of mistaking that as being the goal of meditation. And so then I kept entering into the practice with the hope of this blissful, light, joyous experience that I'd had, and then being frustrated that that wasn't happening. And that really nearly led me to drop the practice until I had this teaching come along in a lot of different forms that meditation is a practice. It's not a goal. And in particular, it's not about reaching one of these blissful, enlightened states or whatever you want to call it. So I think if we have a misperception of it, then we can engage in it, I wouldn't say in an addictive way, but in a way that we crave it, that we are kind of grasping for it. And whenever we crave or grasp for things as human beings, it doesn't tend to lead to a lot of happiness. Indeed, it tends to create suffering. If, however, we see it as a practice, then I don't think we have that risk of becoming addicted to it. The next question was a super pragmatic one. Meditation sounds great, but I've tried so many times to start a practice and I never stick to it. How do I do it? So on the technical side, I would definitely recommend using an app. I use Insight Timer. It's a free app. It has an extremely broad and diverse range of teachers and methods, and it has something extremely simple, which is just called a timer. And you can set it so that it rings a chime at whatever time you would like it to. It also has a tracker, so it shows you how many consecutive days you've done. And I personally find that really encouraging because if I see that I'm on a streak there, it really keeps encouraging me to show up the next day and keep that streak going. But aside from the technical thing, there's the behavioral or the habit aspect. So what really helped me to start my practice was taking a tiny or atomic habits approach to it and just breaking it down into the smallest practice that I could conceptualize. So that meant finding an anchor or something that I could stack the habit onto. So after my alarm goes off, then the tiny habit was I walked my meditation cushion. So I wasn't even committing to meditate. I just, in the beginning, was getting myself in the habit of waking up and walking to the meditation cushion and then celebrating that. So that might have been with having a tea or just like patting myself on the back. Well done. You got to your cushion. And then over time, just building it up. So I think initially I started with a commitment of just like 2 minutes a day. I'm just going to meditate for 2 minutes a day, and then have built it up over time to a much longer practice. So if you first try it out in the morning and it's really not sticking, try and find something you could dock it onto in the evening, like after you brush your teeth or after you have dinner or after you walk through the door, and just make it as small as you can. And then commit to a period of time. So in tiny habits, they work with 5 days, that you just commit to doing this tiny habit for 5 days, making sure to celebrate after each time you do it, and then working out at the end of that how you want to go forward. So Small is beautiful, and I think that really helps you just be really gentle with yourself as you're starting to build a new habit and slowly build it up. The other thing I would do is find a teacher whose voice you like on one of these apps, or a method that you feel really connected to. Try out a range of different methods. See which one feels like it's comfortable for you, that you can engage with, and then just use that in the beginning so that you don't have that decision fatigue of working out each day what practice that you want to do. No matter what, the most important thing is just this mindset you have with yourself, being kind, gentle, open to whatever happens, and just committed to trying it. Okay, I don't know about you, but for me, that's enough theory. Let's move into a practice to close up this podcast. Because I want you to just be able to float off after the practice, I will thank you now for joining for this episode of the Grateful Podcast. Warmly invite you to subscribe or leave a review if you're enjoying the podcast. And of course, know that you can send through questions that you would like us to explore here by emailing podcast@thegrateful.com. If you're really interested in how meditation and broad suite of other practices can help you in your leadership journey, you might be interested in our Be the Change or Lead the Change programs. Applications are currently open for the next cohort of Lead the Change. That's a 6-month leadership and facilitator journey for women working in food systems and sustainability who are looking to play their role in transformative change. We explore together what it means to lead ourselves, lead others, and lead change. And we've just got a couple of spots left in the next cohort that starts on April 26. If you'd like to learn more, you can check out the link in the show notes at www.thegrateful.com/lead the change. So now, let's practice together. I'm just going to take you through a 10-minute guided insight meditation to wrap up this episode. Coming to find a comfortable seat, feel free to take a seat in the chair or sitting on the floor with the legs crossed with a cushion underneath the hips. Or perhaps a more comfortable posture for you is to kneel with a cushion underneath the sitting bones, sitting back on the heels. If none of those options are available to you, also feel free to lie down for the practice. Once you've found a comfortable position, just taking a moment to lengthen through the spine, allowing the shoulders to relax down away from the ears. Taking your awareness to the crown of the head, very slowly sweeping that awareness down through the body. As you do so, just gently releasing any tension that you come across. Letting go of any holding, any controlling, any gripping. Taking a moment to turn your awareness to the body, noticing any sensations that are present, perhaps some tingling, warmth, or cold. There's no need to label these sensations as good or bad, simply observing them exactly as they are. As you notice these sensations, becoming aware that you're not identified with the sensations. You are the one who is observing them. You are that non-judgmental, compassionate awareness. Turning your awareness towards your emotions. Again, there are no good or bad emotions, just simply observing what's present for you right now. You are not these emotions, you are simply the one who observes them. They're information you take in your awareness. Turning your awareness to your thoughts. Perhaps you want to say hello quietly in your mind a few times. As you do, becoming aware there is the one who is speaking. There is the voice in the head, the thought, and there is the one who is observing. Allowing yourself to sit in this seat of the observer. Now turning your awareness towards your breath. There's no need to change the breath in any way. Simply observing each inhalation and each exhalation. Letting this breath be a gentle perch for your awareness. A focal point you can keep returning to again and again. Resting here in a deep curiosity. Observing the breath with a deep curiosity. It's very natural that the mind will wander and perhaps draw your awareness with it. The point when you notice that that's happening is the golden moment in meditation. Point where you've come back into the seat of the observer. From that place with a kind and compassionate energy, you can just gently draw yourself back to the perch of the breath, guiding your awareness back to the breath. Whenever you notice the mind has wandered, just gently directing your awareness back to the breath as a perch. Now allowing that focal point to soften, broadening your awareness to take in all that is around you. Sitting in the seat of the observer of all that is. allowing any perceived boundaries between you and the world around you to dissolve. Sitting in that space of awakened awareness. Gently directing your awareness back to the breath. Taking your awareness into the body, noticing any sensations. And slowly wiggling the fingers and the toes. I'd like to close our practice with a quote from Viktor Frankl. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space lies our freedom and power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and freedom. Thanks so much for listening, and I hope you enjoy this practice together.